Hello and welcome to my review of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, developed by Eidos Montreal and published by Square Enix. This is the third Tomb Raider game since the reboot of the franchise in 2013, creating an all-new trilogy. But this is also the first game in the new series that wasn't made by the original creators of the reboot, Crystal Dynamics. So will this live up to the high bar of the series so far? So, I need to disclose something at the beginning. You guys thought I was done with these disclosures, and I honestly don't go out of my way to look for them, but this is part of working in the industry for 12 years. I know the lead producer of Rise of the Tomb Raider. I also know at least one other person who's currently working at Crystal Dynamics, though I don't believe he worked on this franchise. I do feel like I should disclose that. That being said, that doesn't have a strong effect on my review of the game, as you'll see, but I do wish to be upfront about it so you can best judge my review. Now, with all that out of the way, thanks for watching this. Consider subscribing if you like what you see in here, I'd appreciate it. Now, to start with, we're going to be talking about the graphics, and it's a harder game to discuss because many of the issues I had with the graphics are not consistent. I played the game on Ultra on my GeForce GTX 2070, and this is as good as the game can look without external modifications, at least to my knowledge. I couldn't use HDR though, but it would be dishonest to only look at the top tier graphics for a game and conclude a game looks great or not great when a majority of people are not going to see it in that way. This game does support HDR though. If you're looking for that, it will work. The problem with the graphics though aren't going to be solved by HDR. Laura's hair at times is odd. There's a grainy pixelized feel to it, especially in close-ups, that I just couldn't dial in. The game does offer an all-new technology called Pure Hair, at least that's what it says on the options, and I've never heard of this before, but whether using the low or high settings, it just didn't look natural. While the game did look beautiful at times, it doesn't really feel fluid. There's an unrealistic feel to pieces of the game that just couldn't suck me in and make me forget that I was playing a game. Other games, of course, have done this in the past. It's just not something that Shadow of the Tomb Raider really could get past with its visuals. The biggest visual problem with this game, though, is the animations. I kept noticing very small flaws with a number of animations that I just had to ignore. Like the way the character lands. I'm going to try to show this on the screen, but if you land on anything that's not on the exact same height as you, it feels off. I believe it's trying to use like a procedural generation to figure out where the feet should be in flight, but it glitches for a hot second on many of these jumps, and I can't tell exactly what it is, but it does look odd. The grappling hook swing as well felt off, and just didn't click for me as I was going. It took me over 75% of the game to finally figure out exactly what I didn't like about it, but it's when the swing animation begins, it actually will stop the momentum of the player to attach the player to a new arc and swing in the new direction. The problem though is that the momentum of the player is always in a forward vector, and then it's going to stop that forward vector so it can change to a downward vector. Even if it's for a second or two, it just feels very off, at least if you're paying attention. I'll try again to show this. It's something that you have to feel. Finally, the mud in the game looks atrocious at times. I mean, I played with this a bit because I couldn't believe there was like a lag to the mud markings, and I played with this far more than I should because it's just an odd bug. Now, I do have to say this. This sounds like nitpicking because in a lot of ways it is. Mud that you sink in, like I've shown already, rarely appears in the game. I only remember about 2 places. The landing animations mostly work, except when they don't, and the grappling animations just felt off. But it didn't bother me that much until I finally understood what was going on with the animations, and then it was unbearable. I still think these are problems that should have been solved and weren't, but it led me to wonder a little bit about the polish that was done to the game. Let's talk about the story, though, which also has a few issues. The game starts with Lara Croft raiding a tomb. It's, the name of the game. She grabs an artifact, a small ceremonial knife, which coincides with the tremor happening. Here's the thing. There's an interesting moment here, but minutes later, a doctor then tells Lara that she caused the apocalypse, and now he's going to have to go save the world. It turns out that he's a villain, and the only one who seems to say this, but Lara doesn't come up with the idea on her own. This is just thrust at the player as a hard fact from an unreliable source, and it's accepted. And besides, this is our new villain. A man so forgettable, I actually don't remember his name. It's Dominguez because this is YouTube and I can take the time to look it up, but immediately at the beginning, when he takes the knife and tells Lara about the apocalypse, we also find out he's the bad guy. The mysterious and enigmatic Trinity Corporation, filled with knight mercenaries from Rise of the Tomb Raider, is gone. It's just Dr. Dominguez's group now. He's the head, and he literally tells us this. It's still Trinity, of course, but it's not as interesting now that we know the leader, and they really don't do anything else with this. This isn't the only thing from the previous games that feel wiped out. I don't remember much of Rise of the Tomb Raider, admittedly, but neither does Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is this new story, and everything that happens in the previous two games doesn't seem to matter much. But all of this isn't that important, at least not to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The plot thread is talked about a bit and forgotten. Dominguez does show up, but the idea that Laura is torn because she caused the apocalypse, causing people to die, is forgotten until the final moments of the game. The last hour of it. She whines about the apocalypse for maybe an hour in the opening, and that's it. This is a common theme, though. Early on, Laura fights a jaguar, as you'll see on the screen, who growls at her face and decides not to kill her. How convenient. Why? It's just given up. So many story points are like this. They are just things that happen. Jorge, Laura's friend, meets a woman who's interested in him and flirts and romance blooms, and then she disappears for about 3 hours of the game, and later on assists again. But during that time, I completely had forgotten who she is. It doesn't help that a good portion of the game, Laura is actually alone. She doesn't develop a story or narrative during that time, but instead has to push on silently. She doesn't really even mumble to herself. Several new enemies will appear during this section, and they have no explanation. They just attack you, so they, of course, must die. Now, this is the perfect time for Laura to talk about that feeling that she has to kill, or she's, torn emotionally. She doesn't even bring it up here. It's just, this is how games go. Later on, at least one of the two groups that Laura has decided to murder gets a long backstory long after their conflict. The player gets an understanding of who they are and what they represent, kind of. I mean, there's information, but it comes so long after you've seen them that you forget about it. And then it's a long time before they appear again. There's even a flashback that comes at the wrong point. After about 2 levels of the game, there's perhaps the most interesting part of the story. We actually see Laura as a little girl exploring her childhood home, Croft Manor. She sees it as like a new caved home to raid and all. It's a great idea, but it slows down the gameplay. This section actually would have been a perfect section for the tutorial of the game, and even use it as almost a bridge between the two games, especially with what happens at the end of Rise of the Tomb Raider. No spoilers, but if you do know what I'm talking about, you can see how that might connect with Croft Manor. But it's not. It just changes the pace of the gameplay without a major payoff, other than reminding the players that Laura's father died mysteriously, which we actually already knew from previous games. It's one of the few things I remember about this series. There's actually a few other problems at the end of the game, but we're going to avoid them for spoilers. Just realize that this is a game that has a heart of a good game. Maybe even enough good ideas for more than one good game. But it never sticks with any of these storylines long enough. Laura causes an apocalypse, but we won't talk about that until the narrative decides us to so late in the game. Jonah has a girlfriend, which, 5 hours later, we introduce to her, and she introduces us to a single person a second time. That's really her arc. None of it is done well. That brings us to the gameplay, and the one thing I consistently remember about the previous 2 games is that raiding tombs was enjoyable, but both games didn't have enough tombs to really visit. While there were simple puzzles in the challenge tombs, they were some of the best parts of those games. While Shadow of the Tomb Raider has many more tombs to raid and new challenges, there's even an all-new difficulty system as well that has options to make the game harder by hiding hints in Laura's path that she's supposed to take, for instance. Or if you want harder puzzles, you can actually have the option to make Laura quiet while solving a challenge, and that's appreciated. Having the easier settings is perfectly fine. I actually appreciate that, but giving players a better challenge is worth applause. Quite a bit, especially in a puzzle game like this. Though many tombs are a little bit simple, there's even a story puzzle, though, where the final step after figuring out a gotcha puzzle is Jonah radioing the last piece. Turn it to 8. That's the final piece. What? A few puzzles turn into just story cutscenes, which is disappointing, but the challenge tombs and the off the main path style will always challenge players, and they're really good. The game also quickly tries to help players, a little too quickly actually, when moving between platforms. The game usually will throw up a suggestion in the world to remind people use the grapple axe because you have to use it to swing from location to location, and almost every time it's necessary it pops up, as if they expected players to forget that they even had it. Now, perhaps this is something that they found out during playtesting was necessary, or that's an unnatural motion that people forget, but it pops up extremely quickly every time. The grapple axe itself feels like an all-new feature, and for the entire game I actually assumed that this was the new toy in the franchise. But the grapple axe was actually in Rise of the Tomb Raider. There's really nothing new in the gameplay of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Well, okay, almost nothing. There is this idea of towns and being able to walk around exploring a town or a hub area to get little hints about collectibles or finding new things to do through speaking with people. It seems to be the big new feature of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but it also was a section that I kind of rushed through as fast as possible. The towns and the hubs are fine, but they end up slowing down the narrative rather than making the narrative work better. They become roadblocks so that you can either explore or just rush through, and of course, I rushed. Towns do have minor side missions, but these tend to be busy work to get through to get some minor reward, like not even stuff worth chasing. There's only a couple of side missions in the game, but after 2, I was already set and ready to just go on with the game and its lackluster story. There's also a return to stealth combat in the game, which is probably Shadow of the Tomb Raider's strongest point. Being able to sneak up on enemies, take them down, works real often, and while there is a decent challenge to the stealth combat, ultimately, well, stealth doesn't matter. Even if you perfect stealth 2 or 3 areas, taking down everyone, the game eventually drops in troops who know exactly where you're located because there's always going to be a gunplay section. Players can't avoid this section at all, and it's when Shadow of the Tomb Raider becomes the most average game possible. It's like some executive somewhere said, well, it's a major video game, so we need to focus on shooting. The thing is, Tomb Raider as a series isn't a gun game. It's not a gun game. They always had guns, pickaxes, bows, and arrows, and more, but it's more about exploration of the tombs, climbing around the environment, and more. When Shadow of the Tomb Raider ends up focusing on gun combat, it feels almost like they ran out of interesting and unique ideas and just needed to have some combat to appease certain people or something. And finally, there are collectibles in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. A lot of them. There are many times when the player enters a room, uses the sixth sense that Laura has to ping the room to find out what's important, and sees 3 or 4 collectibles at the same time. You then have to run over to each of them, hit the interact key, and then you can proceed with the game. Now, if you're a completionist, beware. There's a lot here, at least a couple hundred. But while each object has a little backstory and a little flavor text, many collectibles are just writing about some topic, whether they be Trinity's procedures or handkerchiefs from explorers. If you love flavor text, these are definitely going to satisfy you, but for most people, it's just yet another object you can or have to go collect. Overall, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a disappointment. It's not a bad game, though. There's a lot of solid work, good attempts and stuff. If it was a new franchise or a standalone adventure not starring Lara Croft, it actually could be recommended. It has good moments. But seeing as this is the third and possibly final game of the Tomb Raider reboot arc, a task that it doesn't even try to take up, with it focusing only on its personal story, it just brings nothing new to the gameplay table except bigger open areas where you can talk to far more people. I really can't find anything that would make me want to recommend Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Ultimately, I have to give Shadow of the Tomb Raider a 2 out of 5. If you're a fan of the series, I think you should be able to understand that this is the weakest of the 3 reboot titles. But it's so significantly weaker than the first 2 games that I have serious problems with this entry. I love the new Tomb Raider series, and I like some of the ideas that float around Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but it seems afraid to stick with any of these new ideas and develop them, and just becomes a mixture of random thoughts. Many we've seen before in other games, and they also have been done better there. So that is ultimately Shadow of the Tomb Raider. With that said, it's about December 15th as I record this, the middle of December, and I'm going to actually call this the last game of my 2019 season. It's time to look at the best and the worst of this year's reviews. We're going to be talking about that next time. Besides, I actually want to focus on something a little bit different, so I'm going to be doing a series of games next year, which I'm going to announce with the awards. If you're interested in finding out what's coming next, or my opinions on the best and the worst I've played this year, consider subscribing, and if you haven't yet, ring that bell to get notifications so you can be the first to hear when those videos come out. I'd appreciate it. We've actually broken 500. I'm amazed that we've done that, so let's keep throwing. Since I've just reviewed a disappointing sequel, I'm actually going to pop up 2 others for you to check out. Just Cause 4 and Middle-earth: Shadow of War. They're really disappointing, man. Check them out to find out why. Until then, I'm King Link, and thank you for watching.